getting 8 FPS here, which is absolutely brutal. Completely unplayable. There's so much latency, like I can't even see what's going on. I'm going to be testing Black Myth Wukong on my 4070 Super. I'm going to take a look at 4K, 1440p and 1080p, but I'm going to do 4K first, so I've got that resolution set here. Graphics-wise, it's going to be really tough at first. I'm going to look at 4K native, so we've got resolution set to 100%. I've also got full ray tracing on with it set to the max, which is very high, and then all the graphics set to the max as well. I know this is not going to be playable like this at all, but I thought I'll just take a really brief look so we have something to compare it to at 4K, but we're getting 8 FPS here. I won't stay too much on this, but we've seen it at least. I'm going to immediately switch on DLSS and frame generation, so I've got the upscaling set to 67%, which is DLSS quality, and then I've got frame generation on here. Now, this is still not going to be too good, but at least it's definitely better than playing at 8 FPS. I should imagine we're going to get kind of some pretty bad latency. Am I feeling that? I've forgotten the controls a little bit on this. That's not the button. But we're seeing an average of 35 here. Definitely feeling a little bit of latency, as you'd expect from going from 8 FPS at native. But it could just show you what it, what it can do with DLSS and frame generation. Still, I think VRAM's probably going to be a problem here with ray tracing on. But mostly staying in and around that 35 area. It's not dipping too much. 0.1% low though. Noticing a fair bit of stuttering in that frame time. That's bringing the low down. I've switched it back to 4K native, but I've switched ray tracing off now. As you'd expect here, it's still fairly heavy. Not seeing above about 25 FPS. We've got an average of 24. So it's definitely a lot better than with ray tracing. When we had ray tracing on, we had about 7-8 FPS. So at the moment, we're maybe averaging maybe like 15. Well, 15. We've got an average of 23. So it's not a massive difference with ray tracing on and off. You know, sometimes we're used to seeing it be upwards of sometimes 30 to 40 FPS. Master said so. Power-wise, just over 200 watts. It's about 100 watts less than my 4080 Super. Even obviously we're pretty limited to 12 gig VRAM on this as well. Pretty much maxed out by the looks of it. I should imagine when we had ray tracing on, we were almost definitely way over VRAM. I've dropped the graphics down a little bit, so I've just changed the preset to high instead of cinematic. How much of an improvement does that give us? I'm seeing it break 40 there, so it's almost doubled our FPS. Not quite. It's quite a big difference though. Definitely think you can visually tell the difference in the game for sure. Graphics don't look as nice as cinematic. I'm going to take a look with DLSS and frame generation on. I've got the upscaling set to quality, which is 67%. And then I've got the graphics set to cinematic. Seems, looks like we're getting over 60, which is good. Saw it dip down a little bit there. There we go, 57, 58. It's a little dip under, but this is definitely going to be a lot nicer to play it like this. I've switched it down to 1440p now, so you can see the resolution here. It will be 1440p native at first, so I've got resolution scale set to 100%. DLSS and frame generation are off. We've got full ray tracing on with it maxed out, and all the other graphics settings maxed out as well. I'm not really expecting this to be too much better at 1440p. It's obviously quite a bit better than at 4K. We had about 8 FPS. Seeing here, we've got an average of 25, so makes it a lot more playable, but still just very hard to run. I should imagine even at 1080p we'll still see it be pretty low, I think. But you can see straight away, VRAM-wise, definitely a lot nicer at 1440p on this GPU. Sitting under that 12 gig, which is fine. So obviously, as we know, it is a little bit more suited to 1440p compared to 4K. Power as well actually hasn't really changed much. I'm noticing that with different resolutions. Don't really see power come down significantly until you're at like 1080p low. I'm going to take a look now with DLSS and frame generation on. So I've got the upscaling set to quality, which is 67%. And then I've got frame generation on as well. This should straight away make it a lot more playable, which it looks like it is. Breaking 60 FPS there. I'll have a little run around and see if we get any big drops underneath 60. It's potential we might see some areas where we get dips under. But it goes from completely unplayable with DLSS and frame generation off to pretty playable. I could play this game above 60 or in and around that, I think. So I've given us about, not quite 3 times, because we had about average of 25, I think, didn't we? Was the average, so seeing it at 69 average here, it's not quite 3 times. Almost. Makes the image quality, I could definitely tell with that, I think. Makes everything look a lot more soft. Looks a lot sharper at native. I've gone back to 1440p native, but I'm going to try with all the graphics set to medium. So I've switched ray tracing to medium, and then I've changed the graphics preset to medium here. Because I was mainly curious. I know I see a lot of comments. People saying you can just drop graphics settings, and it sort of magically makes the game playable without too much graphics, you know, quality dropping. But I don't really see like the only way you really gain a huge amount of FPS is I think if you go to low settings. We're seeing a gain here going from maxed out to medium. Not quite even seeing the 20 FPS gain there, which is obviously better than nothing. But it's definitely, it doesn't look as good as maxed out. I'm still at 1440p native, but I switched ray tracing off now, and I've got the rest of the graphics still maxed out. And it looks to be, we've gained about 20 to 25 FPS, I think. Still getting dips under 40 FPS here, though. We had about 20 to 25, so at best we're gaining... we're hitting 50 there. So it's somewhere in the region of maybe 20, 25. VRAM's come down quite a bit, seeing 8 gig there, so it's nicer on that. Even power still looks fairly similar, doesn't it? But it's... I think I'd probably advise on this GPU, you're going to be better off, I think, overall, just switching ray tracing off. It's going to be your best bet, unless you're happy to use DLSS and frame generation. But I am noticed when we do use frame generation with those really low native FPS, it does, you do feel a bit of latency, I think. I'd always want to try and avoid that a little bit. And just out of curiosity, I'm going to switch the graphics preset down to high and see what we get with that. Hopefully it should be... There we go. So we're breaking 60 with that. It's quite a big gain of FPS. I know we did have a look at medium settings with ray tracing on. We didn't see, you know, we still had fairly low FPS, but it definitely looks like a lot nicer performance gain once you've switched ray tracing off here. We should hopefully stay above 60. So if you're really against using DLSS or frame generation, then dropping your settings down to high. Mate, you could probably even do a combination of high and very high. So not cinematic, but the game's still going to look, you know, pretty nice. Even seems like our 0.1% low looks a lot nicer here as well without ray tracing on. I've switched the graphics back to their max, which is the cinematic preset. And then I've also switched on DLSS and frame generation. I've got DLSS upscaling set to quality. Now, we should see some fairly nice performance, I think, with this like this. Sitting at 90, you're just under 90 at the moment. So your two options, really, if you did want to play native 1440p and be above 60, you just got to drop the graphics settings a little bit. If you did want to play with the graphics maxed out, you do have the option to use DLSS and frame generation to also stay above 60. We're actually breaking 100 here. So you could actually just probably switch, even, you wouldn't necessarily need to have upscaling and frame generation on both together. You could have one or the other. And you should still be above 60 if 60 was all you were really too fast. Because I think 100 is nice to have, but I'm not sure you really need it in a game like this, to be honest. Jeez, this guy's firing a lot of arrows. So I've switched frame generation off here. I've only got the DLSS upscaling set to quality. I want to see if we're still above 60. Not quite. It's going to be very close in and around that, I think. With a little run around here. Average of 55. So, kind of just about. There's going to be some areas where it dips down more. But if you're not too keen on using frame generation, that is an option as well. To just use the upscaling. I'm going to take a look now at 1080p, so I've got that resolution set here. Graphics-wise, I'll be 1080p native, so it's set to 100%. I've got ray tracing on, and it's maxed out, and also graphics settings are also maxed out. Now, I wouldn't have thought we'll be close to 60 here, which doesn't look like we are. 35. So even at 1080p here with ray tracing on, it's still absolutely brutal on the performance. The image to me looks really weird as well. I don't know if that's the anti-aliasing. It looks kind of weird to me. Could be just because I'm on a 4K screen it looks worse. I'm not sure how much you'll be able to pick that up on the video once I've rendered it all. But it's still overall looking pretty heavy. Over 9 gig of VRAM. 200 watts again on the GPU. That hasn't really changed much. I'm going to straight away here have a look with DLSS and frame generation on, and I've got the DLSS upscaling set to quality. And that easily pushes us over 60 FPS, actually breaking 100 here. So that's about 3 times the FPS we had, which is a big, big difference. And if anything, the image looks a little better to me. I think it is the anti-aliasing. There's kind of really, it looked like the image was just kind of shimmering loads when I was at 1080p native. And it looks a lot better here. Still getting stuttering though by the looks of it with ray tracing on. Pretty big stutter back then. Just dropped our low down to 28. Does seem to be with the ray tracing on in this game. It does seem to do that. I'm still at 1080p, but I'm going to take a look with ray tracing switched off. It's looking like we're getting about just under 60. Actually, some pretty big dips down there into sort of 49 then. I thought maybe we'd be a bit more consistently, at least around 60, maybe even a little bit more. But it does seem like still getting some pretty big dips. So even at 1080p, with ray tracing off, we're still not... The game is still so demanding, which is crazy. If we just switch it to very high... I'm hoping we don't see it dip below 60. We might be just about lucky. Oh, it's getting awfully close, 62. But I think... Still getting some pretty aggressive stuttering as well though, sweating the frame time. Bringing our 0.1% low down quite a lot. I've set the graphics back to the max, which the preset is cinematic, and I've also got DLSS upscaling on, which I've got set to quality, and I've got frame generation on. Looks like we'll get some pretty high frames with this, I should expect, seeing about 120, 122 there. VRAM's down actually, taking a look at that, it's down quite a lot, just over 7 gig.
Master said something about...
If you've enjoyed this video, click one of the videos on the screen now to see me testing more GPUs, and I'll catch you next time.